Welcome back to the 13 Principles of an Effective Salesperson. Today we're going on to Principle 10, moving past objections. Objections are no's. It's the customer telling you a reason why the product's not going to work for them or they're not going to buy it. Now, many people who have not worked in sales a lot are going to think that generally when the customer says no, that's the end of it. I used to think that. I used to think when the customer says no, that they're not interested, I respect them enough to stop. Wow, was I naive. Because as we talked about earlier, people lie and people exaggerate as to why they can't buy in order to protect themselves. And those come out of their fears. Now I know and I respect myself and them enough not to stop at just no. So one of the measurements of your ability to have success as a sales, can you move past a no? That is the big question, is when they tell you no, can you move past it? Because that's the mark of a great salesperson, is how they deal with a no from a customer. Now, when a customer gives you a reason why they don't want to buy, a reason why the product's not right for them, do you believe them? Do you really believe that they know what's best in regards to your product? I mean, think, how much time have you spent getting to know your product? Probably more time than you spent talking to this person about your product. So if it's taking you all that time to learn all there is to know about your product, and you've only talked with them for a short period of time, how on earth can they know enough to know if the product's not right for them? They don't. Because if you believe that they know more and that they know that this product wouldn't work for them and that they are the smartest person when it comes to that, you're done. You're done. Because now you believe them. You believe their story. We talked about the stories earlier on. Was your story stronger than theirs? Your story that this will benefit their life, was that stronger than their story that they don't need the product? When you start to believe their story, you're done. So remember how I said that customers over-exaggerate? Remember how I said you have to believe that your product can make a difference in their life? Well, here's where those become important. If you know that they over-exaggerate, that they lie, and that they really do need this product, then very few objections are worth believing and spending your time on. But they are valid to them. Those fears and those concerns are valid to the customer. Even though you know that most of their objections are just a smokescreen, they're just thrown up there to prevent them from buying because they're scared, the customer believes them. So you cannot belittle them. But remember how in the previous principle where we said that people are not observant? They don't always recognize what's going on or what you're doing? Well, this process to overcome objections is simple. Honestly, it sounds too simple to work. And it would be if people were observant, but they're not. So you can use this principle over and over again. And trust me, they're never going to catch on. So here's the process. Now, whenever a customer brings up an objection, here is what you do. First time they bring it up, you ignore it. Literally, you pretend like they didn't say it. Now, for a lot of people, this is going to feel like I'm breaking the rules of having respect for the customer. I am not. I'm not breaking that rule. But I'm remembering that customers exaggerate, lie, and will talk out of their fears. And that I respect them enough not to let them take counsel from their fears. So if they bring it up that first time, I assume that this is a random fear they're throwing up as a smokescreen to try and prevent themselves from having positive change in their life, because it's scary. And I'm not even going to give that fear the time of day. It's not worth my time. It's not worth their time. So I'm just going to ignore it. The second time they bring it up, you need to acknowledge it. Because in their mind, this is an actual concern. But if you remember what we talked about earlier on in the principles, we talked about the cost-benefit analysis. We talked about using open-ended questions to find out what's important to the customer and then sell on what's important to the customer. Well, the same thing is true of overcoming objections. You only want to overcome the objections that are really important. Though we talked about the dominant buying motive earlier. Well, there's a dominant buying motive, the main benefit that is really going to sell them on it, but there's also the flip side. There is a cost, there are a couple of costs in that analysis that are the ones that are really important to them. They're the big ones. Those are the ones you need to spend your time addressing. Even if this is a real fear, a real objection, a real cost in their mind that needs to be resolved, it might not be a big one. And if it's not a big one, don't waste your time on it. There are much more important objections that you could spend your time on. And the third time that they bring it up, address it and resolve it. Okay? Now I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into these in the next coming slides. So first time, ignore it. Now, as I talked about, this might go completely against your thought process. You're like, I'm just going to ignore what they say? Yeah, you are. And it might feel like it breaks what I said about respect, but it does not. You need to remember what we said about knowing your customer. They will unknowingly lie and exaggerate to protect themselves. So respect them and your time enough to not listen to the lies. Second time, you acknowledge it. Now, as I talked about, the first time they bring it up, it could be the truth, it could be an exaggeration to protect themselves. If it's just an exaggeration, they won't bring it up again. If they do, then there's a chance it's a real concern. It is something on their radar. It is something on their cost-benefit analysis that they're doing. Acknowledge it and then move on, because it might not be a very big concern. It might be a tiny one. Tiny little concern that really doesn't matter to them. But if you spend an extra 5-10 minutes trying to resolve this tiny concern that really doesn't matter, you just wasted a bunch of time. And nothing kills a sales process more than wasting the customer's time. So acknowledge it. Say, okay, I understand you're concerned about that. Let me come back to that, or maybe I'll answer it in my presentation, because it's very possible that they'll bring it up, but you still got more to your presentation, and you might answer it later on. Acknowledge it and then move on. If it's a real objection for the sale, if it's got real weight as far as the decision whether or not to buy, they will bring it up again. And if you answer it in the course of your sales presentation, well, then you just saved yourself some time. Now, the third time that they bring it up, now's when you overcome it. They brought it up 3 times. At this point, if you don't address the issue, they will start getting mad. So now you actually answer their objection and give them a reason why they should still buy. You now know that on that cost-benefit analysis, that this cost, this objection, this fear has real weight. It is important that this objection gets resolved in order to be able to have them make a decision to buy your product. So now's when you actually take that time, recognize the issue, and now you go through and say, okay, well, it's a valid concern. Here's why you should still buy, or here's why that concern is not, something real. Because sometimes concerns come because they don't understand the product. They don't understand what it's going to do, and then it gives you an opportunity to just explain it again to them and overcome that cost that would lose you the sale if you didn't recognize it. Now, you need to remember in this that you can't sell everyone. No one has a 100% close rate. Not everyone's going to buy. You need to realize this. If they bring up an objection 3 times and your answer isn't good enough, you probably aren't going to get them to buy, okay? Some people have major objections, major issues that the product admittedly won't work for them and their lifestyle. It happens. You really want to believe that your product can change people's lives, but honestly, not everyone is going to benefit from your product the same way. You need to recognize that. And if that is the case, learn to let it go. Learn to just let them go. Move on to the next person. Now, when they've brought up that objection the third time, you are going to have to answer it. You're going to have to be able to address that concern, that objection, and give them a good enough answer to make them want to buy. Now, to help prepare you for this, you can know that all or most objections fall into two categories. The costs, questions and concerns regarding the costs of the product, and benefits that aren't really understood or not believed. Okay, they might not believe you that that's really a benefit, gonna, do what you say it's gonna do. They might not understand how that's gonna benefit their family. Most of the objections are going to fall into these categories. Here's an example for you. Selling a sports car, okay? What are some of the costs? The costs of the money, raising insurance possibly, you get pulled over a lot more, tends to be, possibly higher theft on the car. There's a couple different things there. Benefits. Well, you'll feel great in it, feel the power of it as you driving up through the mountains with the wind in your face, the top down, feeling the adrenaline of driving a sports vehicle that you can turn on a dime. Do you notice how I'm telling a story here more so than just listing things? Okay, but these are all types of things. If I want to go a bit more into the features of it, I could go over how many horsepower it gets, that's convertible, that it goes from 0 to 60 in so much time. Yeah, there's lots of different things there. Now, what are some of the objections that will probably come up in that sales presentation? 1, is it really worth the money? 2, is it going to raise my insurance? 3, aren't sports cars targeted by police officers for getting pulled over because they're flashier? You notice how all those costs are probably questions that will probably come up. So if I know the costs, I can know the objections and be prepared. So take the list you did of the costs and the benefits, and I want you to take all the costs that you listed and find a way to address each of those costs. Each one of those is going to get brought up as an objection at some point on that third objection. And you're going to need to have a good answer for it. This is a tool you can use to be prepared. Because the more prepared you are with an answer, the more easily you're going to be able to overcome the objection. And if you come across someone who brings up an objection that you hadn't thought of before, put that on your cost-benefit analysis and then work to figure out how exactly you can overcome that. Because you're going to have to. People are going to have concerns. People are going to have worries. They're going to have things that they're not understanding. And it is your job to be able to help them overcome those fears and concerns and be able to make the decision to better their life. So, go take that cost-benefit analysis sheet that we did earlier, go through all those costs, figure out your answer when that's brought up as an objection. That's the process. Just to review. First time, ignore it. It might not be anything real. Second time, acknowledge it. Sounds like it's real, but it might not be important enough to spend time on. Third time, overcome it. Okay, this is a real concern. This is a real cost on their cost-benefit analysis. I need to address this and overcome it. And if you can effectively do that, get to the real costs, the real concerns, and only spend your time on those, you are going to have a much more efficient sales process and a lot more success in your selling.